30% bonus weapon damage on every chain kill target, plus 25% from Perfect Obliterate stacks. Those together on a 4-piece Negotiators Dilemma build, and the chain damage getting genuinely ridiculous. Hi guys, it's Queenie here, and today I'm walking you through my Negotiators Dilemma build. 4-piece Negotiator Dilemma, Overdogs Exotic Gloves with the weakest link, Equalizer chest with Perfect Obliterate, St. Elmo's and a Dark Winter. I'll cover the full setup, how the mechanics work, and how to run it properly. Let's get into it. Alright, before we get into the gear, let me explain why this build works, because once you understand the two damage sources and how they feed each other, everything else clicks. The Negotiator's Dilemma marks enemies as you shoot them. Kill a marked target and all other marked enemies take weapon damage. That's the core loop. Now the first source is weakest link. That's on the Overdogs gloves. It amplifies weapon damage by 30% to the lowest ranking enemy in combat. There's a tier system to it. Tier 1 is your heavyweights, hunters, tanks, shields, warhounds. Tier 2 is your mid-tier engineers, bombers, mini-tanks. Tier 3 is any other enemy, and skill proxies count as tier 3. In a standard group encounter, you've almost tier 3 enemies in the mix. So when your Negotiator's Dilemma chain kill goes out, it's hitting those tier 3 targets with 30% more weapon damage. The second damage source is Perfect Obliterate on the Equalizer chest piece. Every critical hit increases your total weapon damage by 1%, stacking up to 25 times. And here's the key. You're building those stacks during the marking phase. You're at 60% crit chance. Every shot that applies a mark is probably a crit. By the time you pull the trigger on your first chain kill, you've already got Obliterate stacked up. So the chain goes out at 25% weapon damage from Obliterate, plus 30% from weakest link on the tier 3 targets. That's before we even talk about crits. That's the loop. Obliterate builds where all you mark, weakest link amplifies the chain, and the negotiators spread it across the entire group. Alright, let's go through the full setup piece by piece. Our main aim is to actually get 60% crit chance before we start speccing into crit damage. So the mask, we're actually going to put crit chance on it. Backpack, it's crit chance again. As that's already 2 pieces, that's going to give us a 15% crit chance with the 2 bronze set bonuses. So we would check our crit chance. And then we have the Kneepads. We'll put crit chance on them if you need more crit chance, otherwise it's crit damage. And when it comes to the holster, if you need crit chance on them, you put crit chance, otherwise it's crit damage. The gloves is Overdogs, the exotic. The talent is weakest link, 30% bonus weapon damage to the lowest ranking enemies in combat. I've already explained the tier system, but to tie it back to the piece, this is what makes Overdogs worth the exotic slot in the Negotiator's Dilemma build. Especially your chain kills are spreading damage across multiple targets, and the weakest link guarantees that spread. It's hardest against tier 3 enemies, which are almost always present. The chest is Equalizer, Perfect Obliterate. Every critical hit increases total weapon damage by 1%, up to 25 stacks. Losing 1 stack at a time at 60% crit chance, you're stacking this constantly. By the time you've applied 4 or 5 marks, you've already deep into double digits Obliterate stacks. Don't swap this chest out. It's the engine that keeps this build running. 60% crit chance and 160 crit damage. Let me just be honest about the numbers. 60% is the floor for this build for 2 reasons. 1, the chain kills are what makes the Negotiator's Dilemma special, and constant crits make those chain kills hit hard. 2, Obliterate needs crits. The faster you stack, it's the faster your damage hits the ceiling. drop below 60 and both your obliterate stacking and your chain damage feel inconsistent. 160 crit damage is solid. If you can push it higher without touching the crit chance, do it, but crit chance comes first every time. And to put those numbers in context, at 25 obliterate stacks and hitting a tier 3 target, you're looking at a 55% bonus weapon damage before crit damage even enters the equation. That's 25 from the obliterate, 30 from weakest link, 60% crit chance, 160 crit damage, hitting plus 55 weapon damage. That's when the build gets genuinely ridiculous. Skills are a Decoy and Reviver Hive. Decoy is doing a lot of work here. It pulls enemies' attention. It gives you time to establish your marks before anything rushes you. And it groups enemies up so your chain kills hit multiple targets at once. More marks active means more chain damage, means more weakest link value. It's your setup tool. Drop it at the start of every encounter. Reviver Hive is your safety net. It is very useful at higher difficulties or when you're running solo. Getting caught out in a bad situation mid-chain happens. Reviver Hive means it doesn't end the run. Specialization is Gunner. Negotiator dilemma chains eat through ammo faster than you expect, especially in larger encounters where you are tagging 6 or 7 enemies before pulling the trigger. Gunner keeps you in the fight without having to break off and restock mid-chain. Primary weapon is St. Elmo's, and there's a reason for this. 70 round magazine with the Negotiator dilemma. You're making 4, 5, 6 enemies before you pull the trigger on a kill. So you need uptime on the mag. St. Elmo's gives you that. The shock rounds also give you a window mid-fight where enemies stop moving, which means 3 marks on anything around the shock target. Secondary is a Dark Winter named SMG, vector base. The talent is Perfect Killer. Killing an enemy with a critical hit gives you plus 90% crit damage for 10 seconds. You're at 60 crit chance. You're constantly critting all the time. 1 crit kill with this thing and your chain damage spikes from 160 to 250 crit damage for the next 10 seconds. With obliterate stacked and weakest link active on top of that, that is pretty wild. The flow, St. Elmo's for tag application, and then sustained pressure Dark Winter when you want to burst a target and trigger another chain at amplified damage. So how do you actually run this? Drop your decoy at the start of the encounter, let it pull attention, let the enemies commit their positions, then start attacking with the St. Elmo's. The 70 round mag means you can mark 5 or 6 without reloading. Don't kill anyone yet. Just paint your targets. Every one of those marking shots is also building obliterate stacks because you're critting at 60%. Once the marks are up and obliterate is stuck, pick off a tier 3 enemy first. That's the first death, triggers weakest link, and then the chain damage hits all your marked targets at 25% from obliterate, plus 30% from weakest link on tier 3s. If you need more bursts on the next target, swap to a Dark Winter, 1 crit kill procs Perfect Killer, and you're suddenly running at 250% crit damage. Once the tier 3s are cleaned and the chain has thinned, the pack switch back to St. Elmo's for the remaining tier 1s and 2s. Shock rounds if you need to lock something down to finish. I know that sounds like a lot of damage maths and the build delivers once it's rolling, but let me be honest about the weakness. Before your marks are established and before obliterate is stacked, the very first few seconds of a fight is just a regular DPS setup. The chain mechanic needs marks, obliterate needs crits to stack, and you need a kill to trigger everything, so the opening phase, you're just shooting. Once the marks are up and the obliterate is climbing, that's when the build comes alive. Be patient at the start, of each counter, let the setup land, then watch what happens. That's the full setup. If you've got questions about the build, roles, you're not sure about how to prioritize the attributes, anything at all, drop them in the comments and I'll see you on the next one. Bye guys.